This is from Vernon Coleman at vernoncoleman.com, and it's an article that's on his site. It says, "Was Britain taken into the EU illegally? Many constitutional experts believe that Britain isn't actually a member of the European Union, since our apparent entry was in violation of British law and was therefore invalid. In enacting the European Communities Bill through an ordinary vote in the House of Commons, Ted Heath's government breached the Constitutional Convention, which requires a prior consultation of the people, either by general election or a referendum. The signing of the Common Market Entrance documents was, without a doubt, a breach of the spirit of our Constitution." We're going to be looking into that and other issues tonight which relate to the Magna Carta and also the Bill of Rights. Welcome to Windows on the World. This week I'm talking to Arlene Johnson of TrueDemocracy.net. We've spoken to Arlene in the past and had some very, very fascinating conversations. Arlene is incredibly well informed about global politics and the bigger picture, and she joins us today. So Arlene, welcome to Windows on the World.
Thank you so much, Mark, for inviting me to be on your show again. I just really appreciate it.
Well, that's great. We're going to talk about constitutional matters today, things that affect us and have affected us and go into the distant past. So you mentioned earlier on the Bill of Rights. You also mentioned the Magna Carta. Why do you think those statutes are still relevant today?
Well, because people's rights are being violated because they're violating the Magna Carta and the Bill of Rights. Yeah. Because they've deceived the British people in this country, and they deserve to know what's true instead of being deceived, so that they can force Parliament to get us out of the EU. Because in 1972, Prime Minister Heath just took it about himself and Parliament to just do what was illegal according to Magna Carta and according to the 1689 Bill of Rights. And that wasn't fair to the British people.
It's very interesting because we've had a lot of legislation that's come in through them which removes all our rights. The anti-terror laws, for instance, started with the REAPER laws, and we've got now the Counter-Terrorism and Security Act. And these laws, which are brought on the back of terrorism, have removed pretty much all our rights. So it's quite interesting that you bring that up. Now, under the Magna Carta, no man can be deprived of certain rights. That's correct, isn't it?
That's correct.
Yes.
That's absolutely correct.
Now, the Magna Carta was granted by the barons, really, by the landowners, to the peasants.
Yes.
So by even adhering to that statute, are we not referring to ourselves as peasants or underdogs or imbeciles?
No, I don't think the people of this great nation are imbeciles. They know a good deal of information. I do believe that most people in this country do not understand what the EU represents. The EU only represents New World Order or one world government. They're just the same.
Yes, but we've made a bit of a leap there. So we're talking about the ancient rights of the population of this country. I was going to refer to them as citizens then, but that came in with the EU. We were subjects previously, but the Magna Carta came in when we were subjects, which still means we were indebted slaves, basically. So there's no real difference between an indebted slave to a monarchy, an indebted slave to the New World Order. This is quite an interesting thing, even though we did have more inalienable rights in ancient times. Our inalienable rights have been taken away, most recently with United Nations Agenda 21, which most people are unaware of, which is escalating rapidly up and down the country and indeed all over the world. So if we have a new world order, which is basically a world government being formed under the UN, and the United States, they pass executive orders which bypass their own Congress, what hope have we got of actually having inalienable rights in the UK?
Well, I'm an optimist. I would hope that if everyone that's hearing this show will contact their MP and just simply demand that they submit Article 50 to Brussels to get us out of the EU, because it's completely illegal when you consider the Magna Carta has been violated by this legislation pulling Britain into the EC in 1972. So it's just that simple. Prime Minister Heath took it upon himself to violate the Magna Carta and the Bill of Rights of 1689, and he shouldn't have done that. But of course, when you're dealing with the Illuminati, he is under the thumb of the Illuminati, because otherwise they would do away with him, just as they did with President Kennedy in the United States. A topic on which I am extremely well versed. You can read it beginning in my first edition on my website, truedemocracy.net. So it's illegal for the UK to be in the EU, but people need to know this so that they will simply demand that Article 50 is sent to Brussels so that we will be officially removed from the EU in this country.
It's very interesting. I mean, the thing is with these ancient rights and the rights that were granted to us basically by a monarchy, they have been usurped, and it's debatable whether the Magna Carta could be repealed, but Tony Blair actually said that it wasn't relevant anymore, which he would say. But there's a real problem here with what we're calling government and what we're calling our leaders, because we are run by a corporatocracy. The only person who is against what's going on is Jeremy Corbyn, and look at what they're doing to him. He's trying to stand up for the rights of people and to renationalise, which means that the state is going to be running infrastructure and services, such as we're seeing the privatisation of the NHS. We're seeing everything sold off. All council housing is being sold off.
Yes, that's
and
true.
It's being sold to developers. So what's happened is that even local government is being removed from the equation. So when we have a corporate government, which was, say, the Conservative Party, which gets the majority of their funding is coming from huge corporates, okay? Same with the Labour Party. So you've got Labour and Conservative, which is Coke and Pepsi. They're both the same.
Exactly.
There's an agenda being played out. What I was trying to get to, Arlene, because your stuff is incredibly well informed and knowledgeable, is what we can actually do about this, because we've seen our rights trampled on. Now, we've got to a situation now where the people who enforce law and order in this country do not know the law, which is the police. The police regularly work with private interests to steal property and to violate people's rights. So it's very good for us all to say these things about Magna Carta. And I was thinking of this the other night, because I was dying for a pee. And I thought, well, under ancient rights of this country, I'm allowed to urinate on the rear left wheel of a wagon. So I was just thinking whether that would be the case if I did that in the middle of Tottenham, and what would happen, you know. But I don't think you'd get away with that. So I don't want to minimalise what you're saying. It's just that a lot of this stuff, the laws that were passed, say the Bill of Rights and the Magna Carta, how can they be considered relevant now when we've basically society's been re-engineered, and we are slaves now, basically, within a corporate system? Just before I got the break, could you give us a few ideas on that?
Well, people will be slaves if they allow the chip to be placed in their hand or in their forehead. Then anyone in any country will be a slave, because they can, if they don't like something you've done, they'll turn your chip off and you won't even be able to buy food. That's a slave.
This is what's coming.
That's a slave.
Yeah.
So the idea is to not allow the chip to be placed in your hand or your forehead.
Yeah, that's the next stage of what we want to do with their control system. Yeah.
But the people of this great nation voted to leave the EU, and I think that should happen, because I don't know whether the new Prime Minister, Theresa May, will actually see to it that we do leave the EU. And so the idea that I had, that I hope would work, is that by such volume of people in this country becoming aware of this information from Vernon Coleman, from two other sources that I have, that they will simply demand that Article 50 be sent to Brussels and won't take no for an answer.
The people voted to leave, therefore all of this other stuff is a pantomime, and the House of Lords are getting involved now, and they're going to try and block it. Now, what I'm getting to is that if that happens and we're not allowed to leave Europe, will the people of this country finally wake up to the fact they're given no choice at all? We'll see after the break.
Jason Davis.
Hello, I'm Scott.
Scott, so what brought you down to this festival?
I've been coming to Tea Chances since the beginning. You know, it's a community project. You know, they've got a thing in Wales. Everything they're doing is really positive. They embrace the punk scene. You know, beautiful people, lovely place.
So this is kind of a regular haunt for you. What do you think about London generally now?
Shithole.
Yeah, basically, yeah. London is a shithole, like, but
Gentrification's going on. The rich are moving in. The
basically, it's just got to keep the punk scene alive. Basically, like live bands, like all day long.
Yeah.
Just keep all the live venues, like stop like knocking down like the venues and all that, like, i.e. like the Astoria, like, and the Swell Bar and all that, like, you know, which is like both listed buildings. I mean, what's going on there, like?
Madam Jojo's as well.
Yeah. All the youngsters and all that, like, you know, just keep them involved, like, with live venues. Simple, like, really, isn't it? Like, instead of like staying at home on their PlayStation, like, you know, what's all that about? I've got an ex-girlfriend. She's got an 18-year-old son, like, you know, living with her, like, you know, on his computer all the time, and he's fat, and I'm like, really? Stay with your mum. Should be out there, like, you know, that age, like, you know, working, doing something, like, you know. At least be out there on your skateboard or something like that.
Exactly, that's a good place to leave it. Get the youngsters off their arses.
Yeah. They just don't do fuck all these days, do they?
Thank you.
And on that note, fucking ace.
Thank you. And you love Tea
Fuck
Chances.
the system.
We're fucking always there, mate.
Glad to hear that. It's very encouraging.
Oh.
And yo, pug it until we fucking die.
Welcome back to Windows on the World. I'm with Arlene Johnson, and we're talking about how we can take back our rights, the rights which were inalienable. We've talked about the Bill of Rights of 1689 and the Magna Carta, which many people think is still in force. However, Tony Blair and many of our politicians disagree with. Welcome back, Arlene.
Thank you, Mark.
So we've got into quite an interesting debate so far. I just see that we have a major problem with accountability, and it doesn't matter what level it's at, whether it's a local government, a local council, the police, or central government. For instance, MPs in this country do not listen to their constituents.
That's correct.
So what do we do about it? Have you got any ideas?
Well, my idea is that to have so many people contact their MP that they have to listen. Because if you have voluminous amounts of people contacting their MP to the point that they would vote them out of power next time, then I would hope that they would listen to the people finally. Because the people of this great nation have been lied to, and when they find out that they're being lied to, because see, the British press is one of the best presses on earth.
Really?
Yes, it has put out more truth than certainly the American press, and I'm sure every one of you can tell that I'm from America because of my accent. The British press has put out truth about subjects of history I know, but I didn't learn it from my press in the United States. I learned it from people that were put into my life that taught me, so that I know how censored the American press is and the Australian press. But the British press has been truthful about at least 2 incidents of history of which I'm aware. So I know that the MPs are controlled by the whips, but I'm an optimist, and I really think that if enough people in this wonderful country land like a ton of bricks on their MP that they will have to listen to the people because they run the risk of being voted out of power in the next election. So my optimism comes into play because you were given the Magna Carta in 1215, and nothing is supposed to supersede that. And by virtue of the fact that Prime Minister Edward Heath lied to the people of this country and went ahead and put the UK into the EC, negates what rights the British people have had all through the centuries. And so that makes having put the UK into the EC totally illegal and unlawful.
We tried this a couple of years ago, holding people to account over this as a group of people. I think they're called the British Constitution
It's
Group.
the British Constitution
Yeah,
Group.
I've been in touch with them
Yes.
for many years, and
Yes.
it's a great idea. Everyone writes to their MP. MPs get
Yeah.
hundreds of emails,
Yeah.
but nothing's happened. So it seems to me that we have a problem with who we're electing as our MPs. And
Yes.
this seems to be the problem. What we have is a group of people who many people now call them Blairites, or Blairites and Tories. They're out of the same mould. They are working. They're probably not even aware that they're working for corporate interests because they're working for their own interests, and their own interests are aligned with the corporate interests.
I think they're very aware that they're working for corporate
I
interests.
was being nice about it.
Indeed, both parties, whether it's Labour or Lib Dem or Conservative, are being controlled by one entity. So there's no difference between Labour, Lib Dem, or Conservative Party.
Now, Arlene, this is a very important point, and probably the key point, in my opinion, is how do we get that over to people, that people are being controlled by one agenda? Because nobody, when you talk about this stuff to people on the street or in a pub, they do not believe that. They just say conspiracy theory. They do not understand that. That is one of the hardest things to explain to anybody who hasn't got the knowledge or done the background research, that there's one agenda being played out. How would you break that down? If you were going to talk to someone in the street and they came up with the conspiracy theory response, what would you say to them?
These instruments of law that have been given to the people of this great land have been violated. And when they know that via your show, then they will believe it.
Well, we have a certain audience, and that audience is getting broader because we cross over into many different areas where people say are interested in ancient history would maybe look at our other stuff, which is about current politics.
Sure.
But we're talking about a very small percentage of a very large population.
This is why when I get home, I'm going to send an email worldwide to all the people that are in my address book, and I'm going to say, do you live in the UK or? And if it's or, do they know anyone that lives here in the UK that they could contact and make aware of this show so that those people that I don't know will become aware of this show so that they will learn this information even though they never heard of me before in their lives.
Well, this is the important point, but I'm going to be throwing a bit of devil's advocate thing in.
Absolutely,
here, okay?
I
Right?
do it all
And
the time.
I'm going to say, like, one of our most important shows, which would affect every single person in this country, has had a pitiful amount of views, whereas you put up something that's a bit more mystical or a bit ancient history, curiosity, so something that you could actually associate with, people's imagination. They like that sort of stuff. But when you actually point out what's really going on to people, they don't seem to want to know. And I find that very, very intriguing. I've never really understood why that is. We did a show about statins,
Yes.
for instance. Now, 1 in 10 people in this country are on statins.
Yes, that's correct.
And this guy outlined all the dangers of it, what they were, and what was the background to it, and the flawed data that was used in the 50s to promote them. And it's had probably less than 1,000 views. Now, that's the sort of thing that we're up against. People, even when they're confronted with things that affect them and their own mortality, don't even seem to be interested.
That's true. What I find are people that don't want to face the truth because they can't handle the truth. But then there are other people who do. They do want to know. They want to absorb this truthful information. So people are different. And I talk with anyone. I don't care where they're from. Not yesterday. On Sunday, I spoke with someone who works here in London on Regent Street, who's from Brazil. He really wanted to listen to me. And he even gave me his email address. And then I spoke with a man who's Indian but lives here in London. He gave me his email address. There are people that do want to listen. They do want to have the truth. Last night I met a man who lives in North London, and I feel fairly confident that he will send me an email, so then I will have his email address. So there are people that do want to face the reality. It's just that there are other people that do not want to face the reality because they can't handle the truth. So I meet both, and so I just get very happy when I meet someone who does want to listen to what the reality is, and I can talk to them for hours if I wanted.
Yes, that's the point I was trying to get to. Really, it's that we need to remember that it's only ever small amount of the population that will change things anyway. The majority has never done that, but that's really why I brought that up. And I think what we should do is take another short break and just come back to wrap this up. So we'll see you in a couple of minutes. So here we are at T Chances at 3 Days of Punk, and we have Spiz Energy here. You've been on the circuit now for a very long time, and you're doing this part of a 3-day event at T Chances in Tottenham.
That's right.
So what do you think of this venue?
I've been here before. I like it. It feels like a European venue. You know how in Europe you get this sort of thing where you've got the market going on today, and you got 2 stages. There's a bit of ramshackle, although this is quite nice and tidy up here. But downstairs it's a bit ramshackle. But then places that we kind of play, the sort of venues that let us play, do get heavily used, worn, tired. But as long as the PA works and the beer's cold, it's a hit.
Exactly. And a lot of venues have closed down now, haven't they?
We're having a terrible swathe of decent venues just being sold off and bought out and ruined because property developers and overseas investments who are not nothing for the community. It's terrible. As you know, I was part of the Try and Save the 12 Bar in Denmark Street. The Denmark Street looks like it could be sort of saved, but I don't trust the people at the top who are, messing things up.
It seems London's whole landscape is being changed, and what they call social cleansing and gentrification is just really a big corporate sell-off. And you're quite onto this now, aren't you?
I've always been onto it.
Yeah.
I'm possibly more anti-establishmentarianist than I've ever been. But it's not healthy for community. It's okay for if you've got a whole lot of wedge in the bank and money coming in, you'll be all right. But that's not the majority.
Welcome back to Windows on the World. I'm with Arlene Johnson of TrueDemocracy.net, and she has another website where she puts her blogs, which is owg.livejournal.com. Now, we've been talking about the erosion of our rights, our ancient rights, and what we're going to do in the future. So welcome back, Arlene.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Well, we're referring now to Vernon Coleman, who got us into this conversation, really, and he's written quite a lengthy article on why we shouldn't be in the EU and how our rights have been eroded. Is it just a Brexit that's made you bring this in?
Yes, it's the Brexit because people don't understand what the EU concept is. People think that it's trade. No, it's not trade. England was trading with the world centuries ago. There was no EU needed. And so it's complete rubbish that we need the EU in order to have trade. Because
we all had
England's-
the World Trade Organization,
Yes.
which again is a globalism.
Well, World
thing.
Trade Organization is part of the UN, and
That's
the
right.
UN is New World Order. That's the reason that the UN was established. I expose the reason why the UN was established in my 17th edition of my work on truedemocracy.net. So people can read that very short edition because the thesis was so terribly easy to prove. The UN is only New World Order. That's the only reason it was established, was to achieve the New World Order, i.e., the one world government, which will not help any decent human being on this planet, UK or anywhere else. So, Agenda 21,
Agenda 21, yes.
Agenda 2030,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it, it's all New World Order, one world government, and so is the EU. And this is the point that people need to be.
Yes, let's go into that.
become
Let's
familiar.
break that down and why that is. So we know that the United Nations is actually above international law. Many people may not know that, but I was at a conference earlier this year, and there was a lawyer there from Switzerland, and he was doing a presentation on this, and really what the UN is actually about, because we have to remember that the IMF is an agency of the United Nations. Now, if they're involved with global politics, they're involved with global governance, and they're involved with the global banking system.
That's right.
So, that's what you mean by the New World Order.
Yes,
really.
well, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund,
Fund?
sorry.
We could call it a farm.
Yeah, a funny form, is owned by Rothschild here in Buckinghamshire, England. And of course, he is one of the banksters that owns virtually every central bank on earth. There are only 3 countries whose central bank is not owned by Rothschild and those of his ilk: North Korea, Andorra, and Monaco. They own the Bank of England. They own the American Central Bank, which is called the Federal Reserve Bank. They own every other country's central bank except for those 3 that I just mentioned. So, of course, they want the one world government. And the International Monetary Forum, the
World Bank.
the World Bank, the Bank of International Settlements, indeed,
Switzerland, yeah.
in Basel, Switzerland. That is the central banker's bank. And
Well,
I won't
every
go- I
transaction on
won't
the
go-
planet is meant to go through the Bank of International Settlements at some point. Every financial transaction
That's
in the world.
probably,
Yeah.
yeah, that's no doubt true. And it's all against the interests of decent human beings, whether they realize it or not. So what the point is that I wanted to make is that people need to understand what the EU really is, because it's not trade.
That's right. This is something that we've gone into briefly, but I think that it's good to get this out today because the EU is a centralised part of a much bigger picture. So there was going to be 3 unions originally. This was the big plan, wasn't there? The European Union, the African Union, and the Asian Pacific Union. Is that
And
correct?
yes, those 3 unions exist right now. They want to also create a North American Union, which would consist of Canada, the United States, and Mexico, with the ultimate aim of creating a one world government where no nation on this earth has sovereignty, just as the UK has lost its sovereignty. The Spanish came in and fished our cod to the point of nearly extinction. This is why it costs so much to buy fish and chips, because there's hardly any cod left in the English Channel or in any of the waters around the UK. I feel that's wrong, because the UK couldn't do anything to prevent the Spanish fishermen from coming in and fishing our waters in this country nearly dry.
Exactly. And the thing is with the UN that people don't realise is that they're part of this global agenda, which is coming down to their local councils, which I've talked about to a great extent, and people are seeing what's doing to their country now, because council property is being destroyed, social housing is being destroyed, it's being replaced with affordable housing, and land is being sold off to property developers, and local councils will no longer have any say or even involvement in planning locally. This is going to be a very important thing that's happening over the next few years as London is being re-engineered, and it's all down to a thing called United Nations Agenda 21. I've done an article on it called Big Society Change Agents with loads of links, but the main thing is that the way it's being implemented is explained at the beginning of that article. It's very, very simple. But the UN is denying us our personal sovereignty. So not only our international sovereignty and the sovereignty of countries, the UN, through this thing called Agenda 21 or Sustainable Development, denies us our human rights, doesn't it?
Absolutely. No question about it. That's why I exposed the UN for what it is back in my 19th edition, which I believe came out in around 2005.
Yes.
Or so.
Now, we're kind of going around full circle here. I'm going to ask you briefly to sum up, because we've discussed about accountability. Who's accountable, right? Now, I don't believe that our MPs are accountable. I really don't.
I agree with you 100%.
So if they're not accountable, what do we do? We've got leaders which are put in. We've got a bit of hope with Jeremy Corbyn, because he's not controlled by what you're calling the New World Order, which is the New World Order. Just to call it a corporatocracy would be more acceptable to most of the public, I think, because I think even they realise now that everything's corporate controlled and owned. So what should we do? What should we do from here? As an American, what advice would you give us in the UK?
I would boycott any corporate structure that you don't agree with. Let me give you an example. Right now, Bill Gates is trying to get GMO into Africa. GMO is fatal. If we got it here in the UK, people would die of it at some point or other. And of course, that's what they want. They want 95% of us on this planet to die, and they have a variety of ways in which to do that.
Well, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which they're trying to push through, is going to bring in the GM, and it's going to mean that if people start dying off from this poison that's being introduced to them, then they cannot sue the government or the company.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's why we have to keep it from coming in to this country, because it is fatal. I mean, they're forcing it on Americans. Monsanto is headed by a man who's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, which seeks to destroy the United States. Now, I despise my government, but I love my country, so I do not want to see it destroyed. But I don't live there. I live here, and I'm trying to protect this country too, because I love the people of this country. And so this is why I really implore people to just tell everyone you know, tell your friends. If they listen, fine. If they don't kill yourself or don't bang your head against the wall because they don't listen. But maybe friend talking with friend talking with neighbor, to the point where so many people just say, I'm not going to tolerate this. I'm at least going to contact my MP and hope that he or she will listen to me, because I think that is our only hope.
Yeah, and we
Because
need
Article 50 needs to be submitted to Brussels. But that's why we have to have as many people know what the EU is, so that they demand that Article 50 is submitted to Brussels, instead of just being apathetic and letting it go, thinking,
Yes.
oh, it'll be all right. No, it will not be all right, because you give them an inch and they take a mile. And they
Yeah.
do it in very slow increments. It's the idea of, if you put a frog in hot water, he will jump out straight away. But if you put a frog in cold water and gently turn up the flame, the frog will sit there until he's cooked.
Yeah, we'll get slowly
this
boiled,
is
and we're getting
what-
slowly boiled in many ways.
Yes,
and this is the main point.
what they do in
Yeah.
order to inure people to the change. I mean, I've lived 7 decades. I've seen the changes. Now we have a debit card it's got a chip in it, and we put it in a reader, and we put in our passcode, and we pay for our groceries or whatever we want to buy. But there used to be a day and age when you wrote a check for what
I
you
think what we
wanted to
should
buy,
do,
or
yeah.
you paid cash.
Yeah.
Now, Denmark already is cashless. Do you want to be controlled because you can only use your debit or your credit card to buy things? They know right where you bought whatever it was that you bought.
Exactly, centralisation of power is a very bad thing, and that's
Right.
what we're seeing. And in my opinion, people should keep the government and the local authorities and anybody else out of their business. They should barter.
Absolutely.
Go
They're
back to
already-
using cash all the time, and keep the local authority and government out of your business and be sovereign. That's it from Windows on the World. We'll see you very soon.